I've been reading a couple of different articles about the psychology of space flight and space travel. And there's a lot of interesting stuff here to dig into, and we just have a couple of minutes to do this. But the long and short of it is that there are a number of aspects which we don't really discuss. I mean, we talk a little bit when we talk about the potential of continuing to explore space, about the isolation and some of the physical demands, but there are really a number of other psychological aspects that are really being carefully considered. And I'm fascinated by the psychological profiling that is done by the space exploration organizations of a number of different countries. And we're talking about everything from the idea that when it comes to long-term, long-distance space exploration, like what may happen in the future, as Bob Werb told us about from the Space Frontier Foundation a few weeks ago, we really need people who not only need to be self-sufficient but okay with periods of isolation, but they can't be individualistic at all in many cases, because a lot of these, as we go further and further from Earth, it's a very real possibility that both they will never see the projects completed that they are starting, and number two, that they may never make it back to Earth or to any real population. So there's a lot of interesting psychology behind space exploration, above and beyond do we have the right rocket?
Yeah, and I think it'd probably be pretty hard to find exactly what you're looking for when you're drawing from such a small pool of people who are willing to go through the training, and it takes a lot to become an astronaut.
That's right. And in a Wired.com article that I looked at, a lot of the things that are looked at are emotional stability, being able to work under conditions of duress, no history of psychological problems, prone to depression, anxiety. Can they work well with others, but at the same time, extended periods working completely by yourself, maybe without any other people around? So it's a whole interesting venue. And, as technology continues to develop and humans have the ability to go further and further from the Earth and travel in different ways, I think that the psychological issues behind a lot of these things are only going to become more prevalent, are they not? Until such point where people can be in some state of, I don't know, sleep or suspended animation for some kind of long trips. But in the next 100 years, we have to assume this is going to become kind of a big deal.
Yeah, and it'd be interesting to see what happens. You have to imagine that it might be very difficult to keep track of what's going on with people you do send into space.
Right.
So that's another thing. I mean, how do you correct your mistakes if you don't even know what's going on?
Especially as the further and further you get, the longer the round-trip transmission time with whoever is kind of overseeing or monitoring the people becomes, to the point where we could be talking about significant amounts of time, and really it's just kind of a disconnection. You've really got to trust that the screening that has been done was correct.
Yeah, I mean, you remember that test we talked about that I think the Russians were doing, I don't know, probably started a year and a half ago now, where it was a simulated trip to Mars, right? Where they put 3 guys in this small space.
Right.
And the guys literally agreed to sit in there for a year and a half, 2 years.
And go through the processes that the activity they would have on a potential trip to Mars.
Yeah. I mean, can you imagine?
I can't, but here's the thing. In some of these articles I've been looking at, it's actually pointed out that even those scenarios can't really tell us what it would be like, because at long last, those people do know that they're not really that far from Earth. In other words,
help is right, 10 feet away.
They are isolated, but help is there.
And they weren't alone. There were 3 of them, I think.
Right. Well, that's hypothetically, that is what it would be in a trip to Mars. But even there, it's very hard to really figure out what that type of isolation would be like, because they do know that they're not just going to be left to die, and that there are actually people watching their every move from very close, not from millions of miles away.
Right.
Would you go on one of these, not necessarily a one-way trip somewhere, but would you go to the moon? Would you go to the space station for a week? Or, I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, I would. But those are much, much shorter trips.
What about something like the Mars trip?
I don't think I could do that.
You wouldn't want to be one of the first ones?
No way.
What about if it was proven to be safe, but it was still a long trip? I mean, if it was a 2-week trip, would you do it? If it was 3 months, 6 months?
Hey, if there were like a huge city waiting for me on the other end,
right?
Maybe. But to what I'd be going to on the other end, no way.
Yeah, but what length of trip would you be amenable to?
I wouldn't want to spend more than a month or two traveling.
Okay, so if they can get it down,
Mars is out.
if they can get it down to a 2-month trip, then you would be willing to do it, maybe,
Possibly.
if there was the right stuff waiting for you.
Yeah.
Would you be able to take World of Warcraft with you potentially?
That would be a plus.
All right. Well, let's work on that. We'll see if we can get that set up for producer Lewis. Of course, then somebody else would have to be in charge here at the David Pakman Show. I don't know who that would be.